Hopefully that works. All right, sorry about that. All right, thank you, Torben, and also Marianne and Dirk for this opportunity to present. So today, I'm going to share ongoing research on work in the age of automation. And this is a topic of great concern for economic development planners and also the regions that they seek to support. So since the Great Recession, there's been a lot of media attention on job displacement from automation and technology adoption. And this has policymakers and also practitioners scrambling for solutions to offset this job loss. This is not a new policy concern, obviously, but its contemporary iteration got a kickstart in 2013 with a high-profile working paper by Osborne and Frey. And their predictive model indicated there would be widespread job displacement in coming decades, with close to 50% of this nation's current jobs projected to become permanently obsolete. Mary mentioned some of this work, and it's been very influential in our thinking. But that high estimate has also been questioned. Two OECD reports have actually downgraded that number to around 10% for the United States. But that's still significant. Even at 10%, millions of working Americans would be permanently booted from the labor market. And for the state where I live, North Carolina, that translates into hundreds of thousands of jobs. The pandemic has obviously broadened the focus of job loss far beyond technological displacement. So we can't just only focus on these technological effects. But still, there are claims that technological adoption could be expedited in response to this pandemic. And we're already seeing evidence that some large manufacturers and firms in the United States are quickly moving in this direction. So they're rushing their automation decisions in ways that will have devastating and far-reaching labor market effects. So we're less than 1 week away from the most consequential US presidential election in modern history. And I thought I would give us a little break from some of that intense pressure that we're all feeling right now. I thought I would take us back down memory lane to last year's presidential primary. So back then there was still heated debate around automation, and a number of the candidates did weigh in. Some of you may remember the candidate Bernie Sanders. Well, the moderator during the October 2019 debate asked him about this proposal for a federal jobs guarantee, and specifically the suggestion that we hire people who lose their jobs from automation to upgrade our nation's failing infrastructure and transition our economy to clean technology and more environmentally friendly production processes. So this is what labor advocates and unions call the just transition, which is very much centered or the central part of that Green New Deal framework that we've also heard about. Well, another Democratic presidential hopeful, this one, the tech entrepreneur, Andrew Yang, he was not buying it. So he pushed a very different solution. And it's important to note this is one that other Silicon Valley technologists have been especially excited to promote. This is the idea of the UBI, the Universal Basic Income. So giving everybody, and it's not just the poor, a guaranteed monthly stipend, a freedom dividend. So people are not limited to working for the federal government, but instead can focus on activities that they find more meaningful, more satisfying. As he put it, a positive vision in response to the fourth industrial revolution. So a revolution not of people, but of machinery. And this basic income, it would be paid for with a robot tax, so a tax on automation. Presented side by side, these solutions do look quite different. You've got one pushing that federal job creation program, the other federal payments to free individuals from the drudgery of work. But as we scratch beneath the surface, there's a lot more in common here. And it's the assumption that technology is progressing in ways that will upend work. And it is this shared assumption that I want to challenge today. And by drawing attention to an alternative set of institutional solutions that are being adopted at the subnational and regional levels. So to set the stage, I want to share a few vignettes of innovative startup companies in the robotics and automation space. So the first is called Starsky Robotics. So for the Gen Xers on the Zoom call today, this may be a familiar name. It's the main character in a popular TV show from the 1970s about a cop duo. But actually, it's CB radio slang for truck drivers that work together in teams. So this young San Francisco-based company, it's tried to go head-to-head with Tesla and Uber in developing self-driving vehicles, but they stand apart from their competitors because they're hiring experienced commercial truck drivers. They're pairing those drivers with AI or artificial intelligence experts to develop the driverless technology, but equally important to co-design a new physical infrastructure with the hope of giving those truck drivers the opportunity to remain close to, quote, home and family by controlling large fleets of vehicles from remote location sites. All right, the second example, Factory OS is an off-site. This is a state-of-the-art prefab construction facility that combines robotics technology, in-house research and development, and tried and true manufacturing methods to build modular, multifamily housing at much lower cost. Factory OS is housed in a massive World War II shipbuilding facility in Northern California in the city of Vallejo. And while the company retains close links to Silicon Valley investors and also housing hungry tech giants, including Google, what stands out here is the formal connections with carpentry and building trades unions. So these are unions that are feeding that factory workforce, and they're also essential institutional advocates for promoting this technology as a solution to the Bay Area's urban housing crisis. The final company I want to introduce you to is called 99 Degrees Custom. This is a cutting-edge fiber technology firm based in Lawrence, Massachusetts. For the history buffs, this is in a region that is considered the birthplace of American textile manufacturing. So this company hires and cross-trains experienced apparel workers from the region. And most of these workers are Latinx and South Asian immigrants. They're tapping that legacy talent pool to develop high performance fabrics and wearable technologies. And they're partnering with local universities. And that includes MIT, which is a few miles down the road in Cambridge, Massachusetts. MIT is providing them with seed funding and ongoing technical assistance in support of the underlying business and technology model. So why am I sharing these business cases? I'm a planning scholar. I am not a professor at our business school, and this is a workshop on regional inequality, not business strategy or entrepreneurship. I'm sharing them because these cases not only challenge the dominant narrative around automation and employment, they also highlight opportunities for coordinated institutional strategies that align economic innovation, economic opportunity. They illustrate that innovation can be inclusive of blue-collar workers and with less educated workers placed on equal footing with highly educated technology experts. In other words, they're really pushing and expanding what we typically mean by the knowledge workforce. They also prove automation does not have to be job ending. It can be opportunity broadening. And this is a far cry from Silicon Valley's push for that universal basic income or the close cousin, the robot tax, which, as I noted earlier, assume technological progress that destroys jobs and livelihoods is inevitable. But we also see with these cases the makings of what I call an inclusive innovation standard. And we heard that term yesterday from Neil. But here with these cases, it's reinforced by institutions that share a moral sensibility to harness and protect the creative talents of frontline workers. And knowing this means that as scholars, we should also think in broader institutional terms, asking more from institutions for sure, but also asking how more institutions that care about the fate of less educated and vulnerable workers can expand their influence over technology development and decision making in ways that protects and promotes frontline workers and their jobs. So with that in mind, I've spent some time digging into modern day and historic cases where institutional actors shape and reshape technology development and deployment. And I have a growing list of examples, but what I want to do with my remaining time is to share 4 cross-cutting strategies that are in play in many of these cases and that speak to a very different future of work. The first strategy I'm observing in these cases involves institutions intentionally slowing the pace of technological adoption. So they're using that breathing room to devise worker-friendly solutions. One of my favorite examples here is the mechanization and modernization deal struck between a labor union and shipping companies in the late 1950s, when shipping containers were first introduced in this country. Before containerization, port workers supported what was called a breaking bulk system. So they would manually unpack and repack cargo. They used a labor-intensive process that was very much the same in 1950 as it had been at the beginning of the Victorian age. Containerization changed that in ways that was perceived as radical and disruptive as driverless vehicles are today. With this technological shift, goods would now arrive in the prepackaged metal container. They were moved through a series of cranes from ship to truck to train, so no longer by men and muscle. And the idea to use containers was first proposed by a trucking entrepreneur here in the state of North Carolina. He sought an effective means to integrate shipping, long-haul trucking, and the change he would introduce here would eventually become the catalyst for global trade. But in the 1950s, the more immediate and pressing concern was the impact on labor demand. So a man named Harry Bridges, the president of the International Longshoremen and Warehouse Union, he stepped in as a critical actor in shaping labor's response. He actually pushed his members on the West Coast of the United States not to resist the introduction of containers, but only in exchange for a steady-paced phase-in of this technology by the ports that would stretch out over the course of a decade. By prolonging the time frame, that union could ease some workers out of their current jobs, but it could help many others move into new jobs that were being created through technological change. A more recent example of this technology pacing strategy is led by a labor union in Las Vegas, this one representing 57,000 workers in the city's casino and hospitality industry. This union and the Vegas casinos approved a historic collective bargaining agreement 2 years ago, requiring the casinos to give at least 6 months advance notice of new technology implementation. This early warning allowed the union to determine whether workers are at risk of long-term job displacement and then develop lateral pathways, or for those of us who study workforce development, career lattices in order to move vulnerable workers into more secure occupational areas. And what's really interesting is that the Marriott hotel chain, they recently signed a similar nationwide collective bargaining agreement modeled on this Vegas case. So it suggests there is room to expand this further. A second related strategy, the institutional actors here promote high quality vocational training, but this is not displaced worker retraining for jobs in some other sector. It's training to enhance employer commitments to job mobility for incumbent workers within the same organizational and industry setting. So let's go back to the 50s again. The Port Modernization Agreement actually parsed workers by seniority, and it gave those on track to retire by the late 1960s much better pensions and more generous phase-out pay. But more than the social safety net, it established a robust training fund to ensure port workers had lucrative career options in logistics management and port technology. Today, the Culinary Union in Vegas, they manage a similar multi-million-dollar training fund, which again facilitates that transition to high-growth occupational areas. Third strategy, these institutions empower workers by flipping the standard occupational hierarchy so that workers that are at the bottom, that would normally be at high risk of further marginalization from widespread change, are instead repositioned as the technology guiding experts. In Vegas, the Culinary Union administers an annual technology needs survey now. It actually asks those 57,000 members to identify real problems that need a technology fix. The first survey, housekeepers noted they wanted automated carts. They wanted something to help reduce the risk of physical injury because those carts are often overloaded, especially at the start of their shift, with cleaning equipment and heavy supplies. Women workers, they asked for GPS-enabled panic buttons that they could attach or get embedded into the uniform in order to protect against physical or sexual assault. So with this survey, the union is not leaving technology choice to some remote or distant tech company, some entrepreneur that has little connection to this region or with limited knowledge to existing working conditions and challenges. Rather, they're positioning frontline workers as domain experts. They're giving workers the power, the voice to influence technology market development and guide innovations in support of job enhancing solutions. And this means they're bringing to light actual work-based problems that can also affect the company bottom line, and with it, the ability to nurture and retain a workforce. A related example involves a state-funded advanced technology center, this one in upstate New York. And here, that center worked with a small manufacturing firm to co-design a novel robotics application. But in this case, their design partners were not the industrial engineers, it was the frontline manufacturing workforce. The result, a cobot. This is a collaborative robot that embeds within existing production teams. It's actually now the sixth member of the team, handling more repetitive tasks, which are frustrating to do by human hand, but can also slow the pace of production. The idea for involving frontline workers initially came from the company owners, but this state-funded technology center is now positioned to advocate for participatory design principles as it supports and engages other small and medium-sized firms in the region. The fourth and final strategy. These institutions leverage deep pocket funding for regional infrastructure, including clean infrastructure. They're ensuring public funds are not encouraging job displacement, but rather mandate worker protections through formal contracts that are secured through a reinforcing web of workforce and local hiring agreements. One of my favorite examples here is called the Jobs to Move America Coalition, and they recently partnered with planning agencies in big cities like Los Angeles and Chicago, also Seattle, to ensure that these large-scale, publicly funded transportation projects create career-enhancing opportunities for low-income residents. The coalition initially worked with the Obama administration in order to pre-approve what is called the U.S. Employment Plan, with the effort to use that to support inclusionary procurement practices. So the adoption of that employment plan by the city of Los Angeles, which is where I grew up, it meant that labor advocates could extend job access commitments across the entire transit supply chain. So requiring clean tech manufacturers of electric buses and trains to locate production facilities in Southern California and then adhere to local hiring systems to guarantee family sustaining jobs for workers most in need. In Chicago, this same plug and play employment plan, it enabled community labor coalitions to form in order to secure a commitment for 400 good paying jobs when the city decided to extend their subway system, and also ensuring those jobs were inclusive of low income workers of color and gave them access to career enhancing apprenticeship and work-based learning opportunities. So to conclude, these cross-cutting strategies show that when it comes to large-scale technological change, progressive institutions can act as critical gatekeepers, getting in front of technological development to ensure innovation and equity goals are closely aligned from the start. And this is not just driven by labor unions, which, while growing back slowly, still represent a small slice of the US workforce. Beyond these unions, we see active involvement by government-backed research and technology centers, by public transportation authorities, by planning agencies, and also technology leading universities. I mentioned MIT at the start, but there are others that are working to extend this institutional footprint. But could these hyper-local cases also suggest a promising direction for federal and state policy in support of innovation and workforce development? Yes, I believe so. And it is here where I think we can borrow lessons from European and Asian nations and regions. There have been recent reports that indicate their investments in innovative capacity, including technological upgrading, have generated a sizable manufacturing employment boost. How? With coordinated institutional supports that concurrently advance innovation, business management, and workforce development. And not just through investments in quality public education, but through concurrent strategies of employer engagement that extend job quality commitments and work-based learning supports across the entire educational spectrum. And this finding that technological innovation, including forms of automation, could create a positive feedback loop for employment growth speaks to an additional institutional opportunity for researchers to increase public awareness of dramatically different business models, even within narrowly prescribed technological areas. So shedding greater light on the variety of strategies that institutions are devising to gain influence over technological choices through decisive, targeted, and coordinated actions that determine which technologies get adopted at which point in time and with which economic and social interests in mind. So what I've shared today comes from the final exploratory chapter of my forthcoming book with MIT Press. And admittedly, I do call this my sci-fi chapter. These cases all predate the current pandemic as well. And so as I move forward with this research project, I would very much welcome ideas for other examples that I could explore nationally